Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Howdy Partner. We're here with what looks to be like a really, really weird and distorted video of me, apparently. I'm going to try and get that fixed. Hold on. That's been going on today. Anyway, I'm going to drop out here for a second. Hopefully that'll turn back on. You can still hear me. But welcome to Howdy Partner. We're here with me. I'm A.M. Grabelny. I'm a partner solutions architect here at AWS. Got my buddy Taz over here on this side. Taz is also a partner solutions architect here at AWS. And we're joined by, I got to brag and sing the praises already, one of my favorite, I'm not supposed to play favorites in the Partners Network, but I've got a long history with Auth0. I've used Auth0 a lot. But we got Chris up here from Auth0. Say hi, Chris.
Hey, everybody.
Cool. And so today we're going to be talking about all things identity, right? That's what Auth0 handles the best, identity and managing identity, doing things with tokens. We're going to learn about probably some JWTs or JOTs, or there's 1,000 ways to say these things we could argue about. That's always fun to do. But starting with identity, Taz is going to give us, I think, a very descriptive and, how would you describe it, Taz? Intro.
Entertaining?
Well, let's not get like crazy here. Entertaining, well, maybe entertaining.
Yeah, it would be a shame if this stream actually entertained people.
Yeah, so it's all about identity, and Ted's going to give us an intro here. But if you're joining us for the first time ever, Howdy Partner is a show we do every Monday and Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific. You found us. It's 2 p.m. Pacific right now on a Monday. But we feature new and exciting partners from the AWS Partner Network, which is how we collaborate with people and companies and solution partners that build things that help you consume AWS services more easily, make your life building AWS workloads easier. And today with Auth0, again, like I said, I've used Auth0 a lot. It makes your life so much easier if you're building something that needs to consume an identity, right? So, typically we're talking web apps, mobile apps that have some sort of user component to it, right? If you need to sign in to an application that you're building and then store specific data around that user, something that Auth0 takes like 20 of the steps away from you so that you don't have to build them. It's incredible. I can't really express how much I love Auth0 succinctly. So,
well, we got 2 hours for you to try.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk about how much I love it just for the next 2 hours, probably. Like I said, if you're new, join us every Monday and Wednesday. If you're new to tech, if you are, you've been in tech for a long time, hopefully you'll be able to learn something. We're very newbie and beginner friendly here. So if you have any questions as we're going more in depth around what you see on stream here, just drop it in chat, and I guarantee you we will get those answered, or we'll address it somehow if we can't answer it directly on stream. But Taz, you want to take it away?
That's right. Yeah. Am I good to go ahead and start sharing my screen?
Yeah, sure. Let's let me know when you're ready, and I will switch over to your screen.
I'm gonna do it right now.
Cool. There you go.
Can everyone see?
Yes.
Great. So gonna walk through a little story here. We've got two characters in the story. One is the good guy, and the other one's the bad guy. You'll get to know their names a little bit later in the story.
They have names.
They do have names. I mean, okay. How can you have a story without names? Moral of the story is there's a really cool house that these two want to go to, but unfortunately, only one of them is allowed in.
This is a house party?
It's a house party, like the biggest tech house party that you could ever want to go in. And so,
Who's there? Who's at
who
this
do you
house
want to
party?
be there? Like, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Is Chris at this house party?
Indirectly, he'll come in later in the picture, but as of right now, this is like first time throwing this house party. You know, it was a little bit, you know, maybe they wanted it to be exclusive or they wanted it to be whatever, but they didn't really know how. And so, you know, first round, this is how it goes.
Okay.
You know, blue guy comes up and says, "Hey, let me in." Our little operator inside, you know, the guard, the bouncer, you know, he's got his little headset on. He's like, "Okay, well, that was easy. Didn't really do much." Bad actor comes in. "Hey, let me in." What does this guy say? "Okay."
Oh.
So
anybody's getting into this house party.
Everyone's getting in it. And this guy's, you know, this is a bad actor. You know, he's the guy that's gonna, you know, just annoy you. Maybe he stands a little bit too closely. Like, I don't know, just says weird jokes. Like, we don't want him in that party.
Okay.
In this case, we had no authentication and no authorization. It was just open to the world. Anybody can come in. And, you know, maybe for some parties that's okay.
Okay, so these are two terms I've seen before, many times before.
That's right.
And actually, this is like probably a lot of questions on a lot of people's job interviews, right? What's the difference between these two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Authentication and authorization. We're going to learn about that? I don't mean to derail you.
Yep, we are going to learn about it. So first we're going to try different examples. Like the first thing that, you know, we might want to do is create a guest list to this party. And so, you know, same story. "Hey, let me in. Who are you?" The guy says, "Taz."
Oh.
"Taz can enter. Welcome." So great. Taz got in.
Wait a minute. So, okay, you're in this party now.
Yeah, of course I'm in the party. I'm telling the story. The narrator has to be there.
It's like one of these postmodern stories where the narrator is like not a disembodied voice, like, but a character that is in the story and also not in the story.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So next we have the bad actor, that the guy that you don't really want at the party. He's like, "Hey, let me in." Again, we're gonna ask, like, "Who are you?" We're gonna check the guest list. He says AM. AM cannot enter. Go away.
You know, this is bringing up a lot of old memories for me, Taz, of like middle school or high school or college. Wow.
Then I would suggest, if we bring this back to the tech, then that, you know, maybe the unauthorized, unauthenticated apps are the best place for you, AM. But like,
wow.
I don't know. But you're a smart guy though, and so what you decided to do was try again.
Okay.
And you say, "Hey, let me in. Who are you?" Taz.
There you go. Yeah. Don't let Taz
enter. Welcome. And so in this case, what did we have? We had authorization, right? There was some kind of a list. There was some kind of a control in place that was letting certain people in, and certain people were blocked. But there was really no authentication in that scenario, right? Like, all they had to do was, you know, pretend to be someone else. And so that's really like the first keyword here is authorization. Authorization is just checking whether or not someone has permissions to do something. In this case, Taz had permissions to go to the party. AM, sorry, you didn't. But because we didn't have an authentication process in place, it was really, really easy for AM to just say he was someone else. And so the next layer of the story comes in, because this is twice that AM has been in, that he's been able to come to the party, and we need to lock this thing down. I'm sorry, AM. You were just on my mind when I was making these slides.
I get it, man. Like, you're having a party and you're not going to invite me. It's cool. I didn't want to come to your party anyway.
I tried to invite you to go hiking, but you passed on that, so now you're out of the parties.
You did. I was afraid of that hike. I'm
Rightfully
afraid of the
so.
outside, like the outdoors. I'm not an outdoors person.
Rightfully so. It's a dangerous place out there.
I'm very much like happy to live in the era of air conditioning. Like I probably couldn't have survived before then.
Well, then, for the sake of this story, to just help your own, help you feel better, this was an unair conditioned party, unfortunately.
Okay.
But you didn't know that. You still wanted to go, but you were probably better off by getting kicked out. So I think that's the win-win situation in this story.
Fair.
But going on, we don't want AM, regardless of who wins. In the end, we don't want him there. So next round. Hey, let me in. Who are you? Taz. Prove it. And Taz says his secret password. Correct horse battery staple. And the operator, the bouncer says, you are Taz. Taz can enter. Welcome. Well, that's great. Taz just got in. He had to have a password, something that, AM did not know. And this was probably not a good password because it did come directly from the XKCD comic for password strength. But, we'll talk about password strength another time because we're about to get a lot worse example of a password. AM comes along. Hey, let me in. Who are you? And he's smart. He's like, oh, I know Taz again. He's like, Taz, prove it. Password 123. You are not Taz. Go away.
That's definitely a Taz password, though. Like, I know Taz would use that password.
I mean, I only use it for, a third of my accounts. Usually I add a few more. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe up to 6 or 7 to keep it secure.
Fair.
But so, I mean, you were smart to guess it, but in this case, I decided to use an XKCD comic password.
Okay.
And so then, just for the heck of it, AM tried to be himself. He's like, hey, let me in. Again, who are you? AM. Prove it. Password 123. You are AM, but AM cannot enter. Go away.
Wow.
So in this case, we did have authentication and we did have authorization. It's important that we have both pieces. So in that last scenario there, we were able to authenticate that AM was who he was saying he was, which is great. As you're building applications, you're going to have people that may have different permissions based off of whatever reasoning you have. Maybe it's they paid to be in a different tier. Maybe there's different content or something that you have to subscribe to. So you want to make sure that you're able to allocate those permissions based off of the user. In this case, we want to know who AM is. We want to give him his own identity.
Sounds like you don't want to know who AM is, by the way.
We just don't want you at the party.
Okay.
That's all.
So, all right, that's fair.
You're still a person.
Okay.
You're still an identity.
All right.
And we also had to, pair that with authorization in this particular case. Now, there's one last scenario that I want to talk about here with this slideshow, and it's, again, we're going back to the good guy of the story. Hey, let me in. Who are you? Taz. Prove it. And then he's like, I was just visiting your trusted neighbor. They gave me this certificate or whatever it may be. He passes it in. You are Taz. Taz can enter. Welcome. And so what this is this is a little bit of a different type of authentication, specifically federation. And so, we've got all these different services, these different mechanisms to control identity, and they can be complicated. It's easy to talk about these at a high level, to just think, oh, I just need to, have a list of people's names that have permissions. I need to, store passwords. I need to, maybe if I do federation, I just need to be able to, I don't know, store something so that I can verify. Like, it's really, like, at a high level, it's not overly complicated, but to implement it, that's where the struggle comes in. And this is where Chris comes in. The identity of our bouncer that whole time, we couldn't see his badge before, but that's where a company like AuthO comes in. AuthO can give you this functionality that you're looking for, and then some. Later on, once we turn the time over to Chris, we're going to see like how easy it is to implement a lot of these things. We've got some great demos coming up, and there's even steps further. As you build with AWS, there's a tool called EventBridge, and essentially what it does is it allows you to even extend the functionality of AuthO further. So as actions and mechanisms take place within AuthO, you can use those to then trigger other behaviors within AWS. Maybe send a message somewhere, or lock down something. Maybe something happens and you see AM trying to access something, and you decide you need an automated response across your entire AWS ecosystem. That I wouldn't blame you if you see that AM trying to sign in. But there are all kinds of things that you can do. But it starts with implementing like basically understanding the identity of the people that are trying to access your application. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Am I good to do that?
Hold on.
Okay.
Now you are.
Great.
You just got authorization from me.
I just got authorization. I did. I guess you can authenticate.
You're so nice to him after all that.
I know.
No.
Right?
To those watching, we don't deserve AM. He's a good and forgiving person.
That's what Taz is hoping, at least.
I'm hoping for forgiveness after we get off this call. I might be in a different place, but yeah.
Interesting story there, Taz.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty. I think most people can identify with the story.
Well, Chris, you and I, though you were at the party, suffered the same fate. We were not members of the party. You were just the bouncer. But tell us a little bit about yourself in real life when you're not, bouncing house parties for Taz. What do you do at AuthO?
So I'm a solutions engineer at AuthO. So I'm on the pre-sales side. So I'm, kind of a technical resource that helps our prospects through the buying process of understanding what AuthO is, how it can fit their needs, where they can plug it into their system. So I think, like you guys have mentioned, it's a platform that provides identity and access management. So that authentication and authorization that Taz was talking about. And there's a lot to that. So some of our prospects might need all of it. Some might need a little bit of it. They might be interoperating with other products, especially with AWS. They've been a partner of ours for quite a while. Our infrastructure runs on AWS. So likewise, also a big fan of you guys. So, I think on the kind of technical sales side, it's, showing our prospects, like, where are the opportunities for integration? Where are the opportunities for us to save you time, to save you money? And also, I think one of the big ones that you guys have pointed to so far is security. This stuff isn't terribly hard as a general concept, as you were mentioning. But once you get into the nitty-gritty details and you start looking at, where things get exploited, where things get hacked, where, software tends to die once somebody builds it on their own, and now things, maybe not are secure. That's really our job, is to make sure that we're always up on those things, that we're keeping an eye on it.
It's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I built some web apps and some mobile apps in my day, and I never again want to hand roll like a password system. I just don't want to do it anymore. It's wasted engineering effort. It's never, unless you are AuthO or another security-based company, it's never integral to engineering, right? It's always just a roadblock into the next effort. but it's never a piece of valuable engineering for whatever product you're building. It's just something you have to build in a lot of cases. So yeah, I don't want to do reset password. I don't want to do forget password. I don't want to have to build any of that stuff into my application anymore. I've done it like once or twice, and that was more than enough for me. And the first time that I worked with Auth0 was what I really appreciated, just from a developer standpoint, was, oh, this is great. I don't have to manage any of those things, or user sign up or sign in. All of that is just that's your responsibility now, Chris. I have to do it.
And as you know, things change, things evolve, standards evolve, new products get added. So, for example, sign in with Apple was recently added, to our platform fairly quickly after Apple released it. All of our customers got to take advantage of that right away. That's a huge win for them when all they have to do is come into their account, maybe flip a switch in the dashboard, and it just shows up for their customers. So I think there's some big wins there too, is, if you're kind of doing that build it yourself model, yeah, sometimes it's fun, but also there's a lot of risk, as you've noted and we've talked about, but that's a snapshot in time, right? So what happens 6 months down the road, a year down the road? And again, that's where we can help, hopefully make sure that all these things are up to date and secure.
Yeah, just like, this is probably considered older tech at this point now, but I remember a time when you'd have to start rolling your own JWT server, right? Or JOT server, whatever, to generate these tokens and validate them. But that kind of stuff just all built in, right? You will generate a JWT token for me as Auth0. I don't have to worry about when new things like that come out, right? You all are generally speaking at the forefront of a lot of this. So yeah, I love that. That's great. We actually had some questions in chat already. How do I authenticate a Cognito user pool with Facebook without using the hosted UI? I actually don't know that, but I'll do some Googling while we do it, while we talk. You can also go try Auth0, because I know you all support login with Facebook. I think.
Oh yeah. Then, all the common social providers, definitely.
Totally. And then Jonathan asks, does Auth0 store the user data? Which I think is an interesting thing that you can talk to.
Yeah, so as little or as much as you'll provide us. So, depending on the type of user. So, we mentioned, or Taz mentioned, the federated connection. So those are coming from that trusted third party. So any data coming from that trusted third party, we have access to and may or may not store, just depending on the type of provider it is. But for kind of just a simple, if I'm building an app and I want a username, password, sign up flow, in my application, by default, all we are storing is the email address and the hashed password of that user when they signed up. You, as one of our customers, can decide, hey, I want to get additional information for purposes of identifying the user further, name, favorite color, preferences for the app, whatever it may be. Those can optionally be stored within Auth0. But yeah, we try to keep that to a minimal set of user information that we store. Same thing with social providers. We can only get back so much from a social provider. They'll only give so much in that authentication and authorization scenario. But yeah, I think we'll still have a representation of that user. We'll know the ID they had in the federated provider, typically the email address, but not always. So that's kind of the minimum, and then that can be enhanced with either some standard profile fields we have that kind of map to the OpenID Connect spec. But then also we do have some kind of free form sections for storing additional information. So metadata on a user that can be stored within Auth0. Not as commonly used, I don't think, but definitely something that can be useful in the right case.
I did use that in the past.
Oh, nice.
I worked at Box. We had this idea of it's called an app user in the Box world, where it's just a headless user that it's just an ID. There's no password or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you generally need to tie it to some sort of user management system, right? So being the Auth0 fanboy that I am, I would always advocate using Auth0, and that's what we would do. in the solution that I built with Box was we would store the app user ID, which is needed to go generate like, an auth token in Box as metadata on my user. So I would just do the user lookup in Auth0, pull off the metadata, and then be able to generate a token for that user based off of that metadata. So
nice.
I've used
that's
it.
a great use case. I think that's probably a very common use case if you're talking user metadata, is to kind of tie in like some sort of foreign key identifier into your existing systems. Is really common for that. I think also you can use it for things like access control. So I have one database of users, so this entire pool of users, and I have multiple applications, but I don't really want every user to log into every application. So I want to restrict maybe AM can only log into this free app because we don't really trust him, but Taz can log into this premium app because we trust him. Those things could also be enforced. Those kind of application permissions could be enforced in user metadata.
And
did I get the examples right there?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, bye. So now that AM's gone, I guess we can do whatever we want. We can have that party we've been all talking about.
I think he controls the video though, so we're probably in trouble.
Yeah, that's true. He could just kill this whole thing.
That's the only way I can get friends, is by having control of the video, apparently. We got Mo in chat, who, if all of you don't know, Mo is also one of the Howdy Partner hosts. He's in here singing the praises of the Auth0 docs, which this like gold standard of docs, in my opinion, with Auth0. It's one of the things that we're going to look at today with you, Chris. Actually, you've got one of the quick starts, which shout out Auth0. It will actually generate like a quick start repo getting started project that contains all of the keys that you need. Super cool. One of the first places I've ever seen that done, and it was really helpful for getting started and learning the product. Do you want to kick us off, Chris? I know you've got some stuff to show us.
Yeah, am I good to share the screen?
Yeah, go ahead, and I will kick over to that view here.
And to Jonathan, he has the question, how does Auth0 handle roles? And are roles returned in JWT tokens? I think that might come up a little bit later during the demonstration. And if not, if we don't answer your question later on as we're going through this stuff, let us know and we can follow up and clarify anything.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that as we go through this. We've got some kind of basic role-based access control that you can do, right out of the box with Auth0. And also you can plug into an existing system you may have. So if you have those kind of entitlements or that information during the authentication process with Auth0, you can actually call into that system. So you can write code on our platform. So very similar to like a Lambda within AWS. You can call out to your system, grab that info, and add those as custom claims to an access token or maybe even an ID token if the app needs it.
Cool.
Great. Can you guys see the screen? Just want to make sure we're on the right page here. Okay. Cool. Yeah, obviously not a lot of slides because as we've mentioned, want to kind of get to a demo. So really just want to cover a few things, in here. I think what is Auth0, we've kind of covered really well, just the general space. I've kind of given a brief intro. So again, not a whole lot of time there, but do kind of want to give everybody the full picture, so we're not just like diving straight into one piece, because hopefully that'll spark some more questions or maybe some ideas, as you're, the developers out there kind of looking at how do I use this and what do I do? Taz covered 2A there for me, great. So my slide is actually super simple and just a reminder. So, or if anybody kind of missed that earlier on. And then also same thing with EventBridge, talked about it a little bit, but just want to, give another recap of that. And then really more of the demo part there in 3. So looking at taking an example of our React Quick Start and looking at, how would I integrate that into an app, or as AM just mentioned, the quick starts we have let you get started really quickly. I guess that's why they named that. and start you developing. So we'll run through working with one of those quick start apps, and we'll kind of start in the phases you probably would if you're new to this and you're coming in and saying, okay, first thing I want to do is get somebody to authenticate. I want to know, that they're the user they say they are, given this username and password. Then we can look at, let's add in a layer to that. So for these single page apps like React, we're typically going to have an API that backs it. With that API, we need that authorization piece. So, can this user access this API endpoint? Or once they do access this API, what do they have permissions to do within it? And we can pass that on from our app to our API using those JWT or JOT tokens that AM was mentioning. And then finally look at, okay, we've got this set up. So let's take a use case of, why would it be useful to, talk to EventBridge? Why did Auth0, want to partner with AWS and build this integration? And we'll look at, kind of maybe contrived, but a pretty common, pattern that we see is, I built this app. I've got the authentication piece working with Auth0. I've got the authorization piece working. Everything's great. But it would also be nice if maybe my marketing team or, sales team got a Slack notification when a new customer signed up. Like, that's always exciting. You just launched something. So we'll look at how that would work with EventBridge and Auth0. And I guess, obviously Taz and Am, feel free to, jump in with any kind of, further questions here or distractions or whatever it may be.
Distractions we were good at.
Yeah, I can do the distraction part for sure.
Cool. So I guess, at the, kind of, if we wanted to put it into one sentence, this isn't necessarily a tagline, but I think this does encapsulate like what we do. It gives you that platform, like we said, to authenticate, authorize users, and by doing that, we can secure access for your applications, devices, and users. So when we look at just kind of the general landscape here, the resource server has those protected APIs. So it's we as the resource server, Auth0 as the resource server, you can register your APIs with us, and that's how we can provide access tokens to secure those access to those resources for your users. So that's the authorization piece there. You're obviously going to have some sort of application, so clients in the identity kind of talk there. So those applications that are going to need to authenticate users. That could also be an application itself that needs access to a resource. So think backend apps calling an API, machine-to-machine, Internet of Things type apps can also be clients. So a lot of what we're going to show today, actually all of it, are kind of those user-facing applications, those user-facing flows. But we can also handle machine-to-machine there.
Yeah, I was going to mention, that's something that I think a lot of people overlook, is that a user doesn't have to equate to somebody using your application. It can be like an IoT device, which, Chris, I've got a great idea for a startup that I was talking to Taz about before that I think Auth0 is going to fit in perfectly with. I'll save it for later. That's something we could talk about. But you can walk us through maybe the architecture of how I'd set this up.
Cool, yeah.
On the spot.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, go on.
That's my day job, is doing these things on the spot. So yeah, that's good. But yeah, so that kind of final piece here is we need to connect some sort of user store into Auth0. So that really ties it together so that the users or machines, as we just talked, can authenticate and authorize to those resource servers, to those APIs. And those connections can be many different types. So we've talked about those federated connections. So that's, typically something like, maybe Active Directory or G Suite or something like that, where it's, typically employees accessing it. Might be a SAML provider, OpenID Connect provider. Those are usually those federated connections where we're trusting another identity provider to be that source of user information. And then your apps can trust that, we verified that those users that's a trusted entity saying those users are who they are, and basically pass that information through for who those users are there. But then also we can be the user store within Auth0. So if you just want to get started really quickly, you just want to offer simple username and password, sign up and login, great, we can provide that user store. Something really cool that we can dig into that I think, kind of one of the things that sets us apart a little bit, and also really useful to existing applications where you have a data store, is we can actually connect into your database, your API, and kind of proxy that identity through Auth0 to your applications, and also give you a migration path forward to migrate those users either all in bulk or maybe one at a time as they authenticate into Auth0 so they don't have to do things like reset the password.
Wait, but you mean I won't have to run Active Directory for the rest of my life?
Exactly. Or that legacy database you've got sitting there that security is worried about, and they've been telling you need to get rid of it because they can't pass their compliance.
What am I going to do with my time if I'm not just administrating Active Directory all day?
Your boss will find something for you to do.
It's true.
There's plenty of other things that are probably more important than that. But I think it is something we can help with as far as risk mitigation. We do find a lot of customers coming to us that have those existing data stores, and maybe they know they didn't use best practices for password hashing. Hopefully they hashed them in the first place and they're not stored in plain text. Maybe these things just became an issue because of compliance. They just got audited for the first time for some level of compliance they never had. So that gives us a way to say, hey, we can give you a pretty quick migration path forward and away from that.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, if you're a new startup, or even maybe you're just a company that's been around for a little while, your identity, your authentication, your authorization, that's not ever going to really generate revenue for you. So developers, I feel I know for me, I'm always let's build the app, let's build the cool stuff that's actually going to push this thing forward. And so, it's exactly what you're saying. All that other stuff sometimes, from the security side of things, can get, maybe put on a back burner. And that's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. That security should be job zero. We should be working on that much sooner so that we aren't having to go back and address those skeletons in the closet, much later down the road or when it's too late. And so that's where, I love things like Auth0 to just, make that whole thing simple, a lot more simple.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even our customers that have identity teams, they have developers and architects dedicated to identity. They know they don't want to do a lot of the low level stuff. They know that there's some value in offloading a lot of this and, making sure they're up with best practices so that they can really focus on more of the finer points of how identity really works for them and should be working for them. So we can, definitely, hopefully, provide that baseline of, we can do 80-90% of it maybe that they used to do, and then they can tie into us kind of for the rest of it and focus their efforts on things that, hopefully provide them better time to value and better security, better product velocity, all those things that, everybody's boss is probably hassling them about.
Sure.
And then here's our extremely quick recap of authentication and authorization. So first off, we need to identify who the user is. And then after that, if we're talking an authorization scenario where we're going to be, calling an API, we want to verify what the user has access to. So, do they have permissions for this API, or do they have permissions for this specific action that they were trying to take on this API endpoint? And when I say API here, that could also be API gateway. So, typically you can do, I guess, many things with API gateways, but one of the things most of them do, I know AWS does this out of the box, is be able to do a JWT authorizer. So your application can pass on the JWT, which is that access token that says what a user is authorized to do, can pass it on to the gateway, and the gateway could actually be that bouncer first. So your microservices behind it, your APIs behind it, they don't have to implement all that themselves. They can have that kind of bouncer right in front of it.
Kind of reduces the overall surface area for it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think if you're talking those scenarios where you're, kind of more in like a back end for front end area too, and you have, separation of responsibilities across teams, all that stuff, the sooner that you can get authentication and authorization done in that kind of pipeline, probably more efficient for everybody involved.
I just want to call out here too. I just want Taz to notice that Chris doesn't have anything about AM on this slide being not welcome at a party or anything. It's just, there's no AM related call out.
I mean, you'll notice the last edit was 2 hours ago, and I just learned about your party tendencies, kind of late in the game here, I feel. So yeah, I apologize if there's nothing calling you out there.
No, I was actually being thankful for that, Chris.
Oh, I know.
Just saying, Chaz, maybe just take note. I don't know. Just notice something here. I don't know.
I see. Next time I'll flip the example so that I'm the one who's kicked out of the party that I planned.
Oh, it's okay. I'm used to not getting my invites to parties. It's okay. Everybody can feel sorry for me. Feel sad. Just kidding. No. Anyways,
Anyway, so real quickly, yeah. So EventBridge delivers that stream of real-time data from event sources. So in this example, what we're talking about is Auth0 is a source of event data. Specifically, those events in our case are log entries. So within Auth0, within what we call a tenant, so think of that as your authorization server that's dedicated to you within Auth0's kind of cloud platform, will generate log events for just about everything. So a user creates an account, a user authenticates, a user gets an authorization token, a user exchanges a refresh token for an access token. An admin logs into the dashboard and creates a new application. Admin deletes an application. All those things get logged within Auth0. And it's well and good that you can look within Auth0. You can pull those logs via our API. But this integration and some of our other streaming integrations are really great because it gives you more control over that. So, in the example we talked about is, I want to have it so when a new user signs up, I get a Slack notification. That's really easy, as you'll see here in a few minutes, using EventBridge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Nice. So yeah, I think unless you guys want to take questions or anything, or if there's anything that popped up, we can go straight into kind of getting started.
we had a question around GDPR and Auth0. Since Auth0 is storing user data and that type of thing. I don't know if now is a good time to talk about it. We can save that till later as well, and then talk it through kind of what you were mentioning with API Gateway and Auth0 and custom authorizers and things with API Gateway, where you actually, what I was putting into chat, but I'll just say out loud right now to Jonathan, who asked the question. With the API Gateway, you could actually have it trigger when I receive, essentially any call to API Gateway. I can inspect that custom or the auth token header, which is going to be that JWT token.
Right.
I can take that token, send it to Auth0 to validate that it's legit and it's for the user, and just check that nothing has been tampered with it, etc. By sending from my Lambda that is triggered to Auth0's API layer that can validate tokens, and then based off of that result, I can either reject this person's request, or I can say, yep, this is all good, and pass it along to be fulfilled by whatever backend that you have sitting behind API Gateway. Which oftentimes is another Lambda function.
Yeah, definitely. I think even better is you don't even have to really send the token back to us for validation, since they are self-contained. But you do need to grab our public keys. So, there is a call there, but those keys are typically cached. So especially in something like the Lambda authorizer, I would be fairly certain that it's caching those for some sort of time. So that should be very quick also, which I think is good. So it's not really slowing anything down. You're not having to worry about slow network calls to us or anything like that. And same thing if you're passing those access tokens on to a backend API, that's that same process for the API as well.
Right. Yeah. So that essentially says, that can handle your authentication and your authorization at that layer, essentially, where, if the role doesn't match with whatever, access pattern, even though the person is, allowed to access the overall API, but they're not allowed to access this endpoint, for example, you can still reject based off of that too.
Right. Yeah, because we'll see in a bit, you can add permissions or scopes more technically to in that authorization piece. And then, the authorizer or the API itself could check to see, hey, are the scopes that I need for this endpoint, for this action on the endpoint, are they in the token? If they are, cool. If they're not, we're going to reject it.
Yeah, JWT is it's a little, I think, cumbersome to understand at first if you've never seen it before. I actually shouted you out already too. AuthZero runs jwt.io. But once you get that, like, you can actually include. I mean, this was a conversation I had many times at Box. Was that, like, the roles are there, right? Or the scopes or whatever, however you're handling authorization is there. It's not that you're exposing this. The thing that most people ask first too is, like, if I'm putting that in the token, doesn't that mean that I'm putting, like, sensitive data into something that's publicly transmitted across all? Well, one, you should have HTTPS, right, which is encrypted, but still,
Yes.
You're not actually putting the authorization tokens or keys or anything in these. You're just saying this person is able to take on this role in this application, right? And then validating that with the token, which has been signed by a certificate that's trusted by the service that you're utilizing.
Right. Yeah, we can give you that token that has the information in it that your application needs, that your API needs. That app or API can then decode it, can validate it. And I think, the one key there too is, like, there's one thing about being cryptographically valid. So you want to make sure, like, first and foremost, was this token actually signed by AuthZero? Like, that's a pretty key first step there. But the next one is then also validating that the payload of the token is what you expected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it for the right audience? So audience being the API that you're calling. Great if you get a valid token back, but if that audience isn't your API and you still use it, that's not good. You also want to look at things like, when it was issued. So the issued at time, is it expired? Is it for the subject? So is it for the person that you think it should be for? So, they're not like a be all end all and you just trust them outright that anything in there you blindly want to, trust, but you can at least validate that that your app, so like your React app in this case, that passed on this token, your API, that was kosher, right? That made sense. That was all valid. And then you unpack this after cryptographically verifying it. And then you can say, okay, now I need to do some additional thinking here, validate everything within this. And this is a very basic example. There's usually a lot more here. There might be, if it's an ID token, there might be email. If it's access token, there's going to be scopes or permissions within it. But you still have to validate that those make sense. But it does get a lot of this stuff out of the way, and it's a fairly lightweight way to pass this information on.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like that I think a lot of people, when they first encounter this, they're like, oh, I'll just, like, for the example of AWS, I'll just put like a secret key and access key, embedded in this JWT token, which is, no, like, don't do that, right? Like, it should be handled at the service level to figure out, like, the role. It's really, this is still publicly accessible. Anybody can take a JWT token and decode it, right? It's just like
Right.
base 64 encoded. It's not encrypted, right? It's just encoded and then signed by a certificate that you can use to validate that nothing has changed in that token during transit. So everything that you do put into this token needs to be stuff that isn't sensitive, like no passwords, obviously. But you actually just figure out authorization from that scope thing that we'll, I'm sure, see more of as you go on.
Yeah, I think so. What I want to show, kind of today is, if you went to auth0.com, you can sign up for a free account. So you can enter your email, you can click sign up. These can both go to the same spot. And I won't go through that, just save a little bit of time here, and everybody can, do it on their own. You get a free trial for 22 days that's fully featured, that you can, kind of get started with, test everything out if you want to. So really what I want to look at is, what's that next step after that? So, I've signed up, I have it, and here I am. So once I've signed up, I've given it what we call a tenant. So tenant's basically this whole configuration that we're seeing within the dashboard here. So there's things we've mentioned like applications. We mentioned things like connections in here. We've talked about our our logs and our log streaming that we're going to go with a event bridge. So all of those settings are what we call a tenant. You can have one or more of these within Auth0, that you can have under your subscription. Also, I think one thing to note here is this dashboard is great. It's a super easy way to get started, and probably what you're going to use, if you're just testing things out or wanting to first initially integrate with an application, do a proof of concept or something like that. All of this can also be done via our management API. So we do have a full API that supports that dashboard. So it's actually using this API as well that lets you do all these things too. So kind of thinking more into the future of, yeah, it's great, I can point and click around and do some stuff, but what happens when I want to, make a change? What happens when I want to put this stuff into a CI/CD pipeline? What happens when I want to version control my config? What happens when I want to automate these things? Because maybe I have a backend system where, kind of a B2B use, I bring in the customer to me. I'm an Auth0 customer, and now I need to create maybe a federated connection for that customer into Auth0. That's where you can use this API to automate a lot of those things away.
This is actually something somebody brought up earlier. The fact that you all have this API allows for your Terraform support. So you can actually use the Auth0 Terraform provider due, in fact, I believe, to this management API, I would assume.
It does, yes. Yeah, and it's something we just took over from the community to make kind of, first-party Auth0 supported provider. So I know that's getting a lot of love, both still, I think, from the community, but also internally from our team, who are big users and fans of Terraform as well. My sales territory is like the enterprise and kind of the Northeast US. And it's probably 60%, 70% of the prospects I talk to are using Terraform and ask about it. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
I love Terraform. I love HashiCorp in general. We've had HashiCorp on the show in the past, and their products are so cool, man. It's but Terraform specifically blows my mind. So helpful for managing state of your infrastructure, and even cooler that you all have a provider. So.
Yeah, I was happy when that got kind of more support from us than we'd had in the past, because it was definitely something people were asking for. And like you, I'm definitely just a fan of the concept of it, and had used it kind of in past jobs. So happy to see it being fully supported here as well. So yeah, so let's say you just signed up for the trial and you get into this getting started area, which is great. So you can test out your login box. You can integrate Auth0 into your app. You can, add a social provider. So this just walks you through, some of the common features. Then we get into more of the kind of additional security. So things, like multi-factor authentication, making that, super easy to add without you having to build it in, custom, adding other admins to it. So this is, kind of something that a lot of, I think, customers, when they're first getting started, typically refer back to this. You can hide it when you're done, or if you don't want to see it ever again, great, you can do that. So I kind of want to go through, what would it look like to start out with this kind of first step of integrate Auth0 into your app. So this is the kind of the quick starts that we've been mentioning. So let's just go straight into it. Let's do create an app. So let's do Howdy Partner.
We're famous.
And then here we'll choose an app type.
App
yes. Do I need the exclamation point?
I mean, I say yes. What do you think?
I think that's where I'm going to find out it's like a restricted character or something. Look bad. So I'll leave it off for now, just so I look a little smarter. But yeah, this is where you would choose the application type. So instead of having to know all about identity and what flows you want to use and things like that, we make it really easy. These first three are all user-facing flows, so native applications, and that also can include things that are using device flow, so TV apps and things like that, where we're talking about authentication authorization on input constrained devices. That would be that device flow, but those are all kind of grouped under native because they use the same type of flows there. Single page web apps, and that's what we go through today. But then also, regular web apps, they're still out there, according to everybody I work with. But sometimes you might not see that on some of the common, developer surveys and things like that. A lot of back end, technologies that are both newer, like more, Node, typically Express. But we're also, we see a lot of apps in, Java, in ASP.NET, PHP, and all that. So we try to support as many of these as we can for, kind of a pretty good breadth of customers. Then also there's machine-to-machine applications. So in these first three, we're authenticating and authorizing a user. In this last one, we're authenticating and authorizing a machine. So that's kind of the main difference you can think of there.
Cool.
So let's go ahead and create this one, and we'll say, hey, we want to do a single page web app. And these flows are the same regardless of which you choose. You'll see this quick start kind of initialization screen, I guess, pop up next. It's like, hey, what technology are you using? Depending on what you chose, this one, even though it's pretty straightforward, there's only about 4 of them. For traditional web app, I think there's about 15 or so that show up by default. So idea being, you choose which one you want. So in this example, because I'm most familiar with it, and I think it's also, if I recall correctly, one of our most popular quick starts, and probably what most people are familiar with these days, I'm going to choose React. And I'm sorry if I didn't choose your favorite framework. I mean, no disrespect, but this will make it much. Nice. It'll be much less painful to watch me go through this than something I'm unfamiliar with. And then here gets you into the first part of the quick step. So we talked about, the authentication and authorization. So login being that authentication piece. So how do we add user login to React app? And really you get this very basic choose your own adventure. Is I want to integrate it with an existing app. And this down here will walk you through everything you need step by step to integrate with an existing app. One great thing about this, if we kind of look down here, is, walked you through, you can copy and paste all these things into it. It's commented out, so you can literally copy and paste and not have to edit anything in there. Walks you through the dependencies. But then when we get to some of the more detailed code down here, it'll actually fill in information for you. So, the nice thing is it already knows what my domain is. So what my tenant name or tenant domain is for AuthO. It already knows the client ID of this application I just created. So it doesn't just put placeholders in here and say, now go to your app and choose this out. Like, hey, we're smart. We know this. Let's give this to you. So again, it might seem like a lot. Yeah, and it might seem like a lot, but this is for an existing app. So, there might be some things, that you have to create because they don't exist already. Also in future versions of this, I hear, and don't hold me to it. But this will actually be a lot simpler. I think we're redoing how we do some of the React stuff, especially, and I think that'll probably flow into other SDKs to make this a little less copy paste intensive and get you there even quicker. But what I really want to show in here is what I think is one of the main benefits of these quick starts is if you're like, yeah, I've got this app, but I'm really just unsure like how AuthO works, or if I want to use it, or maybe I don't have access to the full code base because I only work with part of the team. You can just download a sample app, and it's pre-configured, which is great. So it's configured just like those snippets were below, but then you get a full app. Or if maybe you just want some reference, you view it on GitHub. And we do have some information down here, and I know there's some links that have been shared on Twitch, but this also then gives you some kind of additional information specific to the type of application you chose. So if you're kind of just getting started with identity, or maybe need to brush up on some things, there might be some good info here. So definitely, take a look at those.
So let's pause right there real quick and do a recap for anybody just joining. I know my video keeps freezing. So Taz, you want to take it? You want to recap for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the moral of the story for this episode, Web Dev Jazz kind of captured it. AuthO has really good docs. That is what we are here to show. But no, in all seriousness, we're a Howdy partner, and it's an episode that we air Mondays and Wednesdays. And you're really freaking out there.
I know. My internet is having trouble today.
Yeah. And we are a live show, as I'm sure you can tell.
No, we pre-recorded this and left in all of my freezing moments for sure.
That's right. And we just invite on great partners like AuthZero to come in, demonstrate their products. We do live demos. Our favorite part is having the comments, interacting with you all. And so keep those coming. And we're going to be continuing on with this demo here.
Yeah,
so
we're talking about, so Chris here is showing us how to integrate AuthZero with a custom application, which if you missed it, it's incredible the amount of languages and frameworks and application types that you could just generate, support for AuthZero from a repo that just like clones to your local environment with all of your credentials already put in. Seriously, I cannot stress this enough. These are the greatest developer documentation pages I've ever seen, period. But Chris, we kind of skipped over this a little bit too, and I'd be curious, maybe somebody in chat wants to know more about this or not. We can go pick based on what people want to talk about. But that login box, do you want to explain what that is really quickly? Because I think that's also a really simple way to get started with AuthZero that sometimes gets overlooked. I'll say this, like I've used several applications, not to name any names, but I can very much tell that they're using AuthZero because when I go over to log in, it looks like this login box. So I think some people, honestly, get started super easily just by dropping this into their application. You want to tell us what this is and what it does?
Yeah, definitely. So the login box we also call universal login. So it's all over our docs. It's in the dashboard. Basically, it's just think of it as a hosted login experience or user creation experience or password reset or MFA. So it takes all the common UI flows for authenticating, creating an account, doing all those kind of password management type things, MFA enrollment, MFA entry, and basically offloads it from your app. So you don't have to build out screens for every single thing that happens around the authentication authorization within AuthZero. Like we just handle that. So if we see, if we do the try it out, this is what it looks like by default. So, this may look very familiar. There's actually a couple different flavors of this. So this is our newer version of universal login. So it does look a little more, or I guess a little less traditional AuthZero that I think AM was talking about because that had kind of a very distinctive look. The nice thing is with this, I guess a few things are nice about it. One is it's modern standards, supports everything out of the box. So you'll notice like I have email address and password. I can create an account with sign up. I could log in with Google if I want or create my account with Google. I, as a developer, didn't have to do anything. This just happens based on what's configured within AuthZero by default. And I can customize this. So I can, kind of do multiple layers of customization through this. So maybe it's just as simple as I want to replace this logo and maybe a color scheme. I don't like this blue. It's not my, the color of my app or the color of my company. So that's really just the most straightforward one. And also the least kind of, I didn't have to do a lot of dev work to get it done. There's kind of a middle level of customization where we have a JavaScript-based widget, which I think was what AM was referring to, a little more distinctive looking, that lets you, with quite a pretty rich JavaScript configuration object, make even further customizations to how this looks. You can, on the sign up, you can have additional information you capture here and store within the profile or within user metadata. So things like that. And then there's kind of a third layer there, which is really cool, which is, since this is just an HTML page, really, is what we're showing here. I mean, I don't mean to, diss our product people who, work hours and hours on, both making these look good, function well, and also all the tech behind it. But since that is, within our world, it's really an HTML page. You can host your own application within AuthZero's login page, which gives you some, kind of a lot of code reuse, hopefully, especially if you're already using something like a single page app. Maybe you can reuse your design language, your frameworks, and all that within AuthZero's hosted login page. So, if you're asking like, why would I use this? A, because it's easy. B, because it's kind of also customizable. But I think one thing that's really cool about it too is if you have multiple applications and you want to do single sign-on across those, so a user signs in to app A, then when they go over to app B, they're automatically signed in. we can easily and securely do that because we use a common login page and a common basically host name. So this one isn't customized, but you can actually use a custom domain for this. So you'll see this in things like, I think since this is definitely a dev heavy crew on Twitch and, for the AWS partner stuff, Atlassian is a customer of ours. So when you go to sign into Atlassian and you go to accounts.atlassian.com, that's actually Auth0's universal login page that they've customized. And that way they can do single sign-on across those apps through Auth0. They can do it securely. They don't have to worry about things like cross-site scripting. They don't have to worry about things like intelligent tracking prevention. This gets around a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I use a few, I won't name them, training pages that confuse my password manager that I use because they think the domain is Auth0 for a couple of these because they haven't customized the domain. They've left a lot of the universal login the same. So every time I try and log in, there's like 3 choices that I have to like go through and be like, nope, because they're using this. I don't know if
I won't show you my one password.
Oh yeah, I definitely have gone through and like now I've got like, a list of Auth0, like my password manager, I've got a list of like a few of them and it's like Auth0 dash this, dash 0 dash whatever.
Yeah. I think, a lot of our customers are using those custom domains because I think it helps from kind of a branding and trust perspective too.
Totally.
Cool.
No, but that was a good question because I know we've kind of talked about, what the login that we're handling login, but like, what does that look like? And we'll definitely show the example here as we go through the quick start. But yeah, I think that was definitely good to cover now too.
And to customize it, it's just click that customize button. Is that basically the way that we'd go about doing that if we wanted to?
Yeah, so that actually takes you over to this branding section. And if you have an existing Auth0 tenant, this left side may look a little different. I signed up for a new one and I guess I got the B in the A/B test. So, you may or may not see this if you sign up for a new account and it may not match your existing account. But really, when we can customize that, there's kind of 2 main things you can do. One is use that new one. The other one's the classic. So that's that JavaScript based widget there. And it does have, as it notes, like that was our kind of older version, but of course we don't call it that, we call it classic. So it does have more comprehensive set of features. So I typically suggest, if you're just getting started, I would try out the new one. And if it does everything you need, cool. You didn't have to do anything, or maybe you did kind of minimal customization, awesome. But if that doesn't, look into the classic. New is where all our new product features are going into. And eventually it will have parity and we'll have a migration path. So you're not making a wrong choice with either. Like, don't worry about that. But I think just evaluate, can you use new? If so, great, because that's going to be kind of the easiest path forward, just because nothing will necessarily need to change there. But classic is still fully supported, doesn't put you in a corner or anything. And then here's where you can kind of go into this really lightweight customization. So here's your logo, I want to change my primary color because I don't like that. I like that for some reason. And I can keep my background color. I save my changes. And then if I go, back over to, where am I? If I go back over to getting started and try it out, I'll see that those changes, took effect right away.
Awesome.
And also that applies for things like, this is really just talking about the general look of it. But also if I went in and, right now we have this, I've just got Google and a username and password. Well, let's say I want to enable Facebook authentication here. Once I do that, and we can show that here in a bit, and I load up universal login again, I'll now see a continue with Facebook button here. Again, developer, I didn't do anything. It was all configuration based because I'm leveraging universal login. Whereas if I built this on my own, or even if you maybe had a custom app within Auth0, you then might have to, do some changes there. So that's again why we try to say, hey, if you can use as much of universal login out of the box, that's great. Because then when you do make changes, or when we add something like a sign-in with Apple, or when we come out with some of the enhancements that Apple was talking about today at WWDC, those things kind of just happen. So there's definitely some advantages there. That's that's our goal. Like, let's take as much of that work away from you as we can, so that you can be just, pleasantly surprised that you have the newest and latest and greatest.
Yeah, and it's cool because, like, a couple of years down the road, maybe we have the new social media platform that everybody wants to use that as the login provider or the identity provider.
I'm gonna log in with my TikTok.
Your TikTok login.
Yeah.
Is that
Can you log in with TikTok?
We can find out. I don't think it's in the database connections that we have out of the box. But we also support, so these are just the social connections we support out of the box, kind of the most popular ones being, up front. But you also do anything that supports OAuth 2. I don't know off the top of my head if TikTok is an OAuth 2 provider, but if they are, then yes, you could log in with TikTok in your application. I think, if we want to talk about maybe a more, not to give you guys any kind of grief, but more serious use case here is I built an app, and maybe I'm primarily focused on like a North American English speaking audience, but now I've expanded and I now have a version that's very popular in maybe, let's say, Japan. Line is the biggest social provider in Japan. All I need to do now is tick the box and say, okay, cool, let me put in my settings, all my information from Line, but I'm going to leave it blank to use Auth0 for this for now. I'm going to save it, and it's like, cool, we've got it saved. So now if we go back over to that universal login and try it out, and I enable it for an application, which I forgot to do. So let me go back to that app. I know we're jumping around here, but let me just enable that Line connection. So there we go. So now we've got all three of these connections enabled. So now when I go back over and try it out, hey,
that's awesome.
Hey. Yeah, we clicked a couple buttons. It was all configuration based.
Yeah, the amount of time like you would have to, like, as a developer, to like implement just like a new thing that you just click the little toggle button on, like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Like, that's awesome.
All right, so now we're going to see the other side, though, where I need to build this into a custom application, and I can't use the universal login, right? That's the quick start that we got?
We're still going to use universal login.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we'll show what that looks like. So yeah, I'm going to go back to that quick start that I started out with. So I'm just going through this flow again, but this is the application, that Howdy partner application. So I'm just going to download the sample, and let's try it out and see if the demo gods are with us here. So let me put that in there. Cool. And let me just switch over. Is that visible enough for you guys?
Yeah, I think so. They'll let us know in chat too if it's not.
Cool. So let me just unzip the quick start that I downloaded here and go into that directory. And if we look at it, it's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty standard React single page app. So if I go back over to the instructions, there's a few steps here that we need to do within Auth0. So we need to set in this application settings, we need to set the callback URL, web origin, logout, blah, blah, blah. But I think we should make this first because, as you all know, this stuff takes a little while. So let's go ahead and run that. And while we're doing that, we'll let that run and we'll go back over and set these. So we'll go ahead and just copy this. And since these are all the same, it's actually pretty straightforward. So if we click over into the application settings, that's actually this app. Yeah, that's this app here. I could have also just clicked over to settings, but since the link was there, it was just way too tempting. So what it asked me to do was, if I scroll down here into the application URIs, it asked me to use that for the callback URL, the logout URL, and the web origins. So depending on the app you're configuring, these instructions may be different, just because single page and backend apps are a little different. If you're talking an existing application you have, these will, probably be different. You may already have a callback URL that you're using for some other authentication, or you may be starting fresh. But we'll just kind of go through this this quick start as the instructions told us for now. So we should be good there. So we definitely want to make sure we go back down and save these changes at the bottom. So those are now saved. And did we time it right? Oh, I've got it running somewhere else. All right. Let's see. Let me figure out where that's running. Oh yeah, I've already got it running over there. Got it. Well, let's kill that. Oh, actually, I should just be able to. I think I've already got that. Oh, I thought I did. How about? Oh, come on. Why am I forgetting my commands? Probably because there's a demo involved. Let's see. Well, let's do this the easy way. I guess it's the oldest one.
Yeah, I think AUX is right.
I thought it was. Maybe there's no dash. Try that again. Oh, come on. I thought I got it.
Yeah, there's no dash. It's
Okay.
no option. One of the, it must be like an older.
Oh, geez. Actually, big hammer approach. There we go. All right. If all else fails, just kill it all.
Kill it all.
There we go. I don't want that window. Jeez. Let's see. So let's go over to localhost. It should still be building a little bit. Yep, still starting the dev server. There we go. All right, so there we are. We've got our sample project. And it has some kind of next steps there. But the idea being, I should be able to just click login. And if everything's working, this goes over to that universal login. And now I can say, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to continue with Google? Do we want to sign up? Let's go through the username password sign up just to kind of show what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my email address and my password. Also, another nice thing about universal login is password hints just happen. You don't have to do anything. It checks it for you, it validates it. So I can go ahead and start entering information, and yay, I finally got it. Something to note here, this only shows up because I'm running on localhost, because we do need to authorize this application. Normally for first-party applications, which this is, you wouldn't see this. So don't be discouraged that like all your users are going to have to do this step. This, once you move off a localhost, this will not apply. And now I'm in, and I have a profile. I'm logged in. I've got a profile. And this is pulling in my profile from Auth0. So I think going back to that question of what user information are we capturing, here's an example of a profile for a default username and password user. So as you can see, pretty minimal.
Yeah.
And that's it. Everybody's happy. You've got authentication in your application. That was easy, right?
Super easy.
And then if we want to jump over, we can see kind of what that code looks like here. So if I look at, this is that login app that I had. Oh, that's where I was running. It was over in that terminal. Darn.
Here, it was killed.
Yes. Yeah. I should have known. But yeah, this quick start lets you run it, as npm, but also if we look over at the README from here, you can also do it with a Docker file. So there's also a Docker image if that's the way that you want to run here. So that way it can be more self-contained. You wouldn't run into the issue I did where you're running Node on the same port. So, kind of multiple ways to get there. But really, when you're looking at this quick start, there's some config that happens here. So your domain and the client ID for that application. And then if you want, you can kind of look at, what really makes this tick is mostly this code within the spa.js. So we call this our spa.js library. It's on GitHub. We can, definitely make sure that's linked to it. But this basically gives you the, using hooks and context, we can give you a way to, I think here's an easy way, and we can pull up the docs if it makes more sense. But we can basically say, within your React app, you can check to see is the user authenticated. If they are, you can get that user object. So that's where we're showing that profile in there. You can also get an Auth0 client to call the authentication API or the management API within Auth0. And then for things like loading states and things like that, we can also tell you, since these are async actions, we can tell you when we're loading our piece of it so that you could show a progress spinner or whatever it may be. And then also we can do what you saw was a redirect flow. We can also do pop-ups as well. So some developers prefer to have that in there. And then we have these effects and all that. But it's pretty straightforward where within your application, what you'll end up doing, I forgot where this one is. This one's in the routes, I believe. Yeah, because within the routes, you'll basically wrap it with the provider within here. I forget where it is in this. I probably should have looked at this a little more carefully before. There we go. All right, it's in the index file. So you basically take that provider that we created within that Auth0 spa.js file. You'll pass in your domain for Auth0, the client ID, the redirect URI, which is where you're redirecting back to. So that's what we had set initially when we created this. And then also within your app, you'll set the redirect callback. So, that flow basically looks like this. Let me pull up something here. So this is really what that flow looks like. So this is a nice little visual tool to visualize what happens in an Auth0 tenant. And this is what we consider our kind of authentication pipeline here. So you have an application, you're coming through universal login, magic happens, and you get access to the resource. So in universal login, we can do some things like security features, like anomaly detection, which is nice. We can also do breach password detection to prevent credential stuffing attacks. Again, we can automatically show those connections. But really, after it comes out of the end of this pipeline, so think of everything past this extensibility endpoint, which we'll cover in a minute, what you're passing back to your application are two things typically. So if it's authentication and authorization, you're passing back an ID token and you're passing back an access token. So those are JWTs, as we've talked about. So those self-contained tokens that have ID token contains more of kind of this information, this profile info. And then the access token containing those authorization pieces for scopes and all that. So that's really what's flowing back to your app at this point. And that's what's being used by, oops, sorry, too many blue windows here. That's what's being used by the spa.js here. When you say on the redirect callback, that's what's going to handle grabbing those access tokens and ID tokens and doing stuff to it. We basically handle that within Auth0, within this spa.js. So the nice thing about using the SDKs here is we can do a few things. So one is, kind of jumping back here, they log out. This button and this URL for logging in gets built for you automatically with the SDK. You don't have to do that. The other thing we do is once you're logged in, and actually I'll continue another way. Let's just do Google this time. Once I'm logged in, this state and this user's information gets stored within kind of the best practices for the SDK. So in this example, we're actually just storing this in memory. We store it in local state. It's, we could probably endlessly debate the security issues one way or another. I know people can sometimes have strong opinions, but our current best practice is, don't store those in local state, store them in memory. So that's what our SPA SDK does. And if we had more pages in this, we would see, we could browse from page to page, and that application state could, maintain across those. We can reload, and we can do what we call a silent authentication. So in the background, we can authenticate, and that user is still authenticated again, even though we basically lost the memory on that reload. So that's the simple thing of, I've gone through, if I look back at this Getting Started tab, I've gone through, let's integrate Auth0 with your application. So I've got a login screen there. That's all well and good. I think we actually kind of covered the social provider too. Once we have an application, let's go back over to this Howdy Partner app. We can have multiple connections like we saw. So those, database, social, they could be federated connections. So kind of looking back here at, if I look at a social connection, that's where we have this list. We can add custom OAuth providers. If this was more like a B2B use case, we could look at enterprise providers. So the two open standards being the big ones up top, most things are going to support them. But also we've, got some kind of first-party support for very specific and very common enterprise providers as well. Also of interest, I think, is
they'd be completely code-free changes, essentially, right?
Right. So yeah, if I look at adding like a SAML provider, these are all configuration based. And once I add that, I then get access to that universal login without having to change any of my code. For consumer-facing apps, sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I think you covered this in the React side, but this is something I get questions about a lot, and I had questions the first time I was using it too. Was it's important to have that client side, the like front end router piece, because that's actually like if you were dealing with an API and retrieving information, you would halt people at the API level. But you can actually even halt people at the front end client level too, using that router by not letting them access like one of the links in your front end application. There's definitely like kind of a disconnect if you've been doing, a bunch of server side web dev before, or like desktop applications if you've been writing those, and keeping people locked out of pages. There's a whole ecosystem on the front end that you have to keep locked out too, and that router portion is where you do it. So it's really cool that your sample app already has that built in, and teaches you how to operate that, so you don't have to go and find, how do I do this with React Router,
Yeah, and I think that's, typically the ID token is where you, adding things like, we talked earlier on about role-based access control. So you can add those roles into the identity or the ID token and use those within the front end app to say, hey, if they're not in this role, they shouldn't be able to access this route even, much less, they shouldn't even get the access token, or they shouldn't have the scopes in the access token either to call any backend API. But yeah, for more of a kind of for UI purposes, it's definitely a key.
Yeah, so we have a question here from someone in the chat. So it's Kanema665 or Kanema. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but I did my best. What about migration of like if you do have a current user base on something else, how would you migrate into using Auth0?
So there's a few ways. So one is if you have that user store and you want to migrate them all at once. So existing database, you just want to migrate all those users. We can do that through, where is it? Come on. Whoops. There we go. Should just type ahead. It's a lot quicker anyway. So if I look, I'm just going to kind of skip around here, but you can bulk user imports with our management API. And we can actually support a pretty broad list of common hashing algorithms. So we might even be able to import those hash passwords into our system so that your users don't even have to reset those passwords. So bulk import via the API is one method. Then there's also what we call an automatic migration, or you might be heard of like a trickle migration. So what this is I create that database connection, but then I also connect it into my system. So my custom database, my custom API. And then really what happens once you have that connected, you can flip a switch that says, now I want to start migrating those users in. And this is really the flow that we use is we check to see if we already have the user imported. If they are, great. We just check the password against the Auth0 user data store. That's super easy, straightforward. That's how it would normally work if it was just a standard database connection, username, password database. But in this scenario, if the user is not an Auth0, what we'll do is we'll call out to your external database, your external API, whatever it may be, and we'll ask you to tell us, hey, given this email address and password, is this valid? If you tell us yes, we can then store the user and you can give us any profile information back that you want to have stored. And then we'll hash that password in our database. So then any future authentications go through this flow on the left side. Or if you tell us no, we'll just deny access to that user. So that way you can, anytime a user authenticates for the first time after you flip that switch, you can then kind of trickle migrate them into Auth0. And you can use these two methods in conjunction. So maybe you want to do this kind of automatic migration initially because you've got a pretty active user base and they're authenticating, once a month, once every 2 months or something like that. You could do that and then say, hey, now I know I've got like a delta of users that haven't been imported to Auth0. And then you could use the bulk import to get the rest of them maybe. You could flip that around even. There's multiple ways to do it and they're not exclusive of each other.
Okay, I know we still have EventBridge left to talk through, but I also need to pitch my startup and have you do a free architecting session for me real quick, Chris. Taz, I think you already know my startup idea, right?
Yeah, and I've got like tens of dollars that I'd be willing to be, your first angel investor.
There you go. See, so the idea is going to be great.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, let me set the stage for you, okay? Yesterday, something very exciting arrived in the mail for me, and it was my first ever kombucha brewing kit, all right?
Nice.
I've never brewed kombucha, but it is very on brand for me to drink kombucha and to probably brew kombucha too. So I'm just expanding my own brand. But what I noticed is there's a lot of stages to this. First off, I had to name my kombucha brew, like give it an identity. And of course, I picked one of the Golden Girls, Dorothy, named my kombucha Dorothy. Obsessed with the Golden Girls, one of my faves of all time shows. So one, there's an identity there, right? Each brew that you have is identified by some unique identifier. Sounds like a use case for Auth0, but where I want to expand my startup is taking that, because you also have to monitor a lot of things as the kombucha brews. You have to monitor the pH level, you have to monitor temperature of the brew, and you have to monitor sunlight. Like it cannot be in direct sunlight, but it has to also have enough oxygen. So I'm thinking, like any great startup, you add IoT to it, and you've got like hundreds of thousands of dollars coming to you from VCs. So I want to add all these IoT sensors that are constantly, pushing to an API layer that I've built. But I have to do it according to like what brew, right? So what would you say? How could I do this with Auth0, where each of these brews, have a unique identity and have to authenticate to this API before they can push their sensor data? What do you think, Chris?
I mean, I think you could definitely do that. I think, what we'd look at is my screen locking up, it seems. There we go. All right.
There we go.
Now I'm back. So, we talked about applications and we talked about, kind of user-facing applications at this point, but we can also do IoT devices, right? Why not? So you've got an IoT device that's doing the monitoring of the kombucha, I take it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The like temperature, pH level and sunlight. I think we could start out with. That's the MVP, right, Taz?
Yeah, I think that those are the golden metrics of kombucha brewing, if I remember correctly.
So what we could do is for each of those IoT devices, we can create a machine-to-machine application.
Okay.
So maybe, they take their names after their creator here, and we just call them, we just give them numbers. So maybe this is AM1 is a machine, so we have that one in there. We need an API to authorize them against, because they're going to be calling your API. You said, right? So it's like, Auth0 management API is something special within Auth0. So it's like, what I really need to do is create that new API first. So this is where, if you had this API scenario or API gateway scenario, this is where you're going to define an API within Auth0. So just to be clear, this isn't an API that your devices are calling. This is just a representation of your API that you're going to be authorizing those devices against. So we want a friendly name. So we call it Dorothy.
Yeah, or Blanche, or Sophia, or Rose.
Your knowledge runs a little too deep on this, but yeah, we'll stick with Dorothy for now.
Okay. I mean, B. Arthur is probably the best, if we're being honest.
So we'll do an identifier. So typically this is going to be a URL. It could be URN. Doesn't have to be publicly available. This is just going to be what we're going to use in an audience in that access token. So typically this would be something that, that is the same as your API endpoint. So let's just say it's GPS. I think we're going to call this kombucha.api. How's that sound?
That's great.
Okay.
Giving us our name.
Company name.
And we're going to leave the signing algorithm by the default. There's use cases where you might need to select another one, but typically you're going to be using the default signing algorithm. We create that. And again, we have a quick start because we love the quick starts. But this would be really if you're looking at, how to consume an access token and parse it and configure API. We're kind of going to skip that for now because we still need to do some more configuration on here, because with those IoT devices, this API might do more than just take in monitoring data for it. Like maybe this API also handles, user management for your users, for your customers. So what we probably want to do is have some permissions for this. So maybe we have a permission or a scope, more technically, that is, let's say, write temperature.
Brew admin.
We'll start with the IoT devices first.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe it's the ability to write temperature data. So we say write temper. If I can spell, I'll just abbreviate it. That's a lot easier. So I write temp data. But maybe the sensors should also be able to read temperature.
Okay.
And like we said, maybe the API lets you, create a user account. It also happens within your API. So your users, sign up with you the first time. So maybe that's write user. We say create user account. Because this API maybe handles multiple things, but the idea being that your application, whether that's a client-facing app or a machine-to-machine application, can request a set of scopes, a set of permissions to authorize that machine or that user to call when it passes that access token to the backend API. So we've got these, we have our API set up, we have our permissions set up. So now we can actually look at authorizing machine-to-machine application. So typically in this, in the user-facing flows, what we're looking at is a user logs in, they're authenticating against this API, and they're authorizing themselves, basically. But here, a machine can't, there's no user interaction, right? So you as an admin need to say, hey, this application is allowed to access this API with the given scopes. So we'll look at the app we created, which was Kombucha? What would we call it? What was the
Yeah.
app? The machine-to-machine app. I've already forgotten. Let's see.
Which
Let's
was
click
the
back.
API?
Oh, yeah. So I did create did I create that test app? Maybe I didn't get that far. We create the test app by default. Let's use that.
Cool.
Oh, I was creating, there we go. Never mind. Now I remember. Sorry, late in the day. I was creating an M1
that's
here.
right.
All right. So I said it's a machine to machine. And now because I have that API represented, I can select it. And notice here's our scope. So again, because the machine can't do anything on its own behalf, I as an admin have to say, hey, this sensor Dorothy can read and write temperature, and I'm going to authorize it. And now we got there. And this is kind of, there's multiple ways to get to the same thing, is I can now see the settings for this machine-to-machine app, and I can see the APIs that it's authorized against and what it's authorized against, and I can adjust those as needed. Typically in this IoT device you would then need to have it have the client ID and client secret that it's going to then use to request an access token from Auth0 and get that access token to pass on to the app. So that's what this quick start goes into, is this is how, customized for this API, we have, here's how you can get an access token for your API from this IoT device. So going through some really common methods here. So maybe your device uses Node already. It's able to run something, pretty well with Node. Here's all it needs to do, which is pass on that client ID and secret, and it's going to get back an access token here. And the token type is a bearer token. All these tokens within Auth0 are JWTs, and they are bearer tokens. So if we look at what one of those looks like, this long line here. So what I can do is copy that and go back over to jwt.io and paste that in. If everything works well, it decodes it. And we can now see that we have the issuer. So this is, when we mentioned before, cryptographically valid is good. It's the necessary first step. But your API is also going to want to check things like, this is who created inside the token. So Auth0 was the issuer of this token. So your API wants to validate, hey, I'm expecting a token from Auth0 with this issuer. Those need to be the same. So the subject is who the token refers to. So you'll notice here, this first part here is the client ID of that machine-to-machine application. So that's how your API can know which IoT device, which sensor is actually using this access token. There's the audience. So that's that API identifier that we created. So again, your API is going to want to verify that that audience matches what it expects. And then also it tells you when the token was issued and when it expires. So you're going to want to make sure that you check to make sure that this token hasn't already expired. Otherwise, you're going to want to reject that and go through this process again of getting a fresh token. And then also there's the scopes here. So these are those scopes that were authorized to be able to have access to with this. So your API would then say, okay, great. All this other stuff's valid here. I can then say, hey, this device is authorized with these scopes, and then use its own logic to determine what that means. Auth0 is not making a determination on that. We're just saying that, hey, this is, kind of flowing through this end to end here. We've said this is a valid access token. That client with that client ID and secret was authorized, and here is the scopes they're authorized to use.
That's perfect. That's awesome. I know Mo is probably going to start yelling in chat if we don't show the event bridge stuff.
Yes, that one's a nice easy one to get to, and I do love it because it's interactive, and it also a pretty good show of how tightly these things are integrated. So we talked about that Auth0's got these has logs that show up. So here's what they look like. So here's all these logs, and you'll notice that I've got things like log in, log out, warnings, whatever it may be. I should have some signups in here, so I can filter within these, these logs. So I think I can do successful sign up. So let's see if we have any of those. We should, because we've logged in a couple times. And because I'm good at this, I guess I tested this to make sure it worked. I even created a backup plan just to make sure, in case anything went wrong, that we wouldn't let everybody down. But you can see these two successful signups. That's kind of a tedious way, right, to get there. So what I want to do is say, hey, I want to look at piping that to EventBridge, filtering for successful signups, and then giving the Slack notification. So cool. What's that look like? So those are log streams in our kind of world here. When I create a stream, I can create an EventBridge stream. Cool. I can give it a name. I'm going to be non-creative here. And then there's some settings. So what I need is my AWS account ID. So let me grab that real quick. Whoops, where is it? I'm gonna have to grab that from, so that's in my account profile. And let me grab that, go back over to the settings. So I need that, and I also need my AWS region. So when you're logged into the console, that region will be in that dropdown. So you just want to make sure those match, because if you're like me and you didn't pay attention to this closely the first time you configured this, you'll wonder why things aren't working. This is why. So make sure you check this. So I want to do North Virginia here, US West or US East one. Yes, I'm in the East.
I remember in my early days of working with AWS, I logged in to take a look at our Dynamo tables, and there was nothing there. And like I panicked. I was like, what in the world? I forgot that I traveled from Texas. I was on the West Coast at the time, and so it defaulted me to some other region than what I normally looked at. But it took me a couple minutes to gather myself and figure, oh, it's different region.
Yikes. Yeah, that's not good. So this is where you get the payload preview. So this is what we're going to send to EventBridge. So you can see, here's the detail is really kind of what we're interested in. So I have some detail, I have some data, and really what I want to key in is this type. So when we looked at the logs, this mirrors what we show in our kind of JSON object for a log. So this just gives you a preview. We can go ahead and save it at this point. And it's like, great. Now we need to go to the Auth0 partner event source with an event bus, or associate it with an event bus. So what this has done is created that event source within my AWS account here. So if I look over at my EventBridge information and go to event buses, or sorry, partner event sources, I should see that I now have a partner event source here. And if I click into that, I can now associate this with an event bus. I can accept the defaults here. I want to create it within my own account. I do associate, and now we're good. We have an event bus. We have a matching event source to send information into that event bus. So now what we can do is want to create a rule. So this basically gets the data flowing from Auth0's logs into this event bus, but now we need to do something with that data. So I want to create a rule here. And I want to select that bus. So here's the bus we just created here. And then I want to create a new rule. And I'm going to say this is new sign up. Whoops. How about sign up? I'll define a pattern for the events. And I'm going to do a custom pattern here, because what I want to do is I want to filter out those log events to just new sign up events. I could take in everything from Auth0 and filter it on what we're going to do is create a Lambda to do a Slack notification, but I don't really want to have to deal with that. Why not just go ahead and save it here? So let me switch over to this Lambda that we have. So I pre-created a Lambda. So this is just a simple Slack webhook. All it's doing is calling a webhook URL for my Slack instance and passing in that, hey, there's a new user sign up, and here's the information coming in pulled from the log event. So I'm pulling in their username and the client name, so the application name, and I'm just sending that to the webhook URL straight over to Slack. I cheated a little bit, and what I pulled in here is basically this filter that we're going to use. So remember when we were over here, it said, hey, here's what this payload preview looks like. And here's the data, here's the type and all that. What I want to do is pull that in and say, whoops, where are we? I want to say, okay, the detail data type, and I want that to equal SS. That's a new sign up event within Auth0's logs, and all those types are documented in our docs as well, so you can filter on what you need. So let me pull that in as the event pattern, and then leave this as the default, the custom bus. I'm going to enable that rule, and now I need to select a target. So we kind of filtered that stuff out. Let's select a target. So in here, I want to use that Lambda function that I have created. And I've got a Slack webhook, which is that Lambda function over here that sends the Slack hook. I don't need to do anything else here. Should be able to add that target. Oops, sorry, never mind. That's there. And what I miss? Why isn't it letting me create? Thought I had everything. Sign up, event pattern, custom. Oh, I have to save the pattern. That would help. There we go. Now I do create, and it's good. Status enabled. So now end-to-end everything should work. Famous last words.
Yeah,
so let's go back over to our app. We will log out. Actually, I'm going to close that and go back over. All right. So now if I log in, I'm going to go ahead and sign up. And this would also work with Google too, but I'll do Google just to make it a little quicker here. Now we're kind of running short on time. So let's continue with Google. I'm logged in, and with any luck, I should see in mere seconds, I should see a Slack notification go in that says we have a new sign up. If I keep talking slowly, that might actually happen. So I always hope.
Buy some time. I do that too.
Yes. These are near real time, I should note, or I messed something up. Of course, it's one of those things that works time in and time out when I test it, but may not have worked this time. Let me just make sure.
Live on stream.
Right. Let me look at the health of this. Everything seems to look good. Errors, last delivery, cool. Nothing yet. Let's see,
is available to
oh,
help.
that was an already existing user. That's why. It would help if I did that. So let me, so it is working. I just tested the negative in there. So let me delete that user. This is why you should always test. All right, let me delete that user for good measure. I'll delete this user as well. So now we have no users in here. So now,
just use that
a new
hammer.
Sign up.
Get rid of everything.
Right. So now a new sign up should happen, and it should go into Slack. So let's cross our fingers, talk slowly again, and hope this happens. Yay!
Hey!
It's the little things really that make me happy.
Yeah, but that was like very easy in terms of coding. I mean, it was like a Lambda essentially, and in that Lambda, you're calling one endpoint. Like the code you actually wrote was not that complex, so
it was
super
minimal.
easy.
And that code should be reusable across multiple use cases too, right? Like we didn't kind of go down a path of being very specific. Since we're filtering the log codes at the event bridge level, that's even kind of even more flexible there. So yeah, I love the simplicity of it.
And as Mo, I'm sure would love to hear me call out, building applications using EventBridge, it takes out half the glue code that you have to write typically. I mean, to do that normally, you would have to subscribe to a webhook URL, right, and have that webhook URL hosted publicly somewhere where Auth0 could send that message to your webhook. You would then have to validate that the message you received from Auth0 was legitimate, right? Probably using some sort of SHA hash, and then send it to some sort of processor, right? Probably with a queue, I would assume, if you were doing this for real, because you don't want to drop events either. Then we're not even to the point where you've done anything with the message. You've just validated and queued up that message for processing later. Instead, with EventBridge, you cut all that portion out and got right to, I just need to process when this event happens. There's your free commercial for EventBridge, Mo. But
I
yeah.
think, add a little bit to add on to that too, because I think it is a great point of, the resiliency of the EventBridge piece is, because of the tight integration that we have, we'll also retry those. So if for some reason we can't reach AWS and EventBridge, gave us back a, sorry, this didn't work or just, completely failed, we'll retry those events so that we don't drop them on our end either. So you've got a lot of resiliency in those systems.
Totally. All right. Well, we're just about out of time here. Taz, what shall we leave the people with today? What do you think? What's the takeaway from all of this?
So I think that the takeaway more than anything, and this is great. We had a couple people join in right there at the end. Definitely go back, watch this from the beginning. It's hard when you jump in towards at the end, but like what we've learned is, one, authentication, authorization, identity management, those types of things are super important, but they're also difficult to implement on your own. With AuthZero, you can, a lot of it's just console-based work. Go in and with a few clicks, you can create these sign-up pages and just quickly download code to get started. The awesome thing is as you move forward, maybe you want to add additional functionality, MFA or different federation providers. All you have to do is go into the console. It's a code-free way to update your login process. And then at the end, you can actually take it a step further. Using things like AWS EventBridge integrations, you're able to look at those log events and then tie those in with things like Lambdas to be able to take additional action based off of the events that are happening with your AuthZero login process. And so, yeah, I think the real takeaway is if you want to do a login for your application, take a look at AuthZero. Like, it's going to get you up and running so much faster than you'll be able to do on your own.
Hey, Chris, what about you? Parting words? Anything last minute wisdom to impart to the audience?
Yeah, and I think kind of reciprocating the praise there. I think AWS is what we run our infrastructure on, and have really dedicated a lot of time into. But also, I think the value of the partnership is for our customers is like you get this tight integration, you get things like us retrying and taking a lot of this headache away. So I think I love EventBridge for that piece, and I don't want to make this all about EventBridge, but it's one of those. The first time I saw it, I was like, "This is super cool," and like you just start thinking about like all the things that you could possibly do based on the data that like we already have, because we'd already had things like taking logs and putting them in like a SIEM type system, but I think this is a lot more exciting than that. And also, don't reinvent the identity wheel. These things are the devil is in the details. You probably don't want to waste your time on it as a developer. You probably have more valuable things to focus on.
Okay, now comes the hardest part of the stream.
By far.
Right, we gotta pick. Well, not we. You, Chris, as the guest, have to pick how we sign off from the stream. And I forget the ones. It's been a while since we have an episode. I think Giddy Up is one of them.
Giddy Up. Y'all come back.
Y'all come back now. You hear? And then Happy Trails. I think. Yeah. Those are your choices. You get to pick how we all sign off together. What do you think?
Do I get to freeform this, or do I have to pick one of the pre-canned?
What do you got freeformed? Well, I'm interested to see what. I mean, we're breaking the mold here, but.
I mean, I was gonna go with the. And I'll probably get it wrong, but it's like you don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here. I think I got it wrong.
Okay.
I'll play closing time. How's that? Do you guys have the rights to it?
Yeah, closing time. Yeah. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. That's the closing time lyric, I think. Yeah. Every new beginning is some other beginning's end.
And yes.
Weird.
That's good.
Yeah. Mo's asking for y'all come back now, I think.
Y'all come back now is a good one. I like that.
Okay. Well, before y'all come back, be sure to come back on Wednesday again with Taz. Taz's going to be here again on Wednesday.
Two this week.
Yeah, twofer with Taz. What are we talking about on Wednesday, Taz?
Sure. So we are featuring the return of the chaos search. So some of you may have been able to view the initial airing of the chaos search episode. Due to some technical difficulties, we had to push that one back, and so we're going to get some refresh on that, and you'll be able to learn a lot about how you can do your log and data management and data analytics on the logs that you're collecting.
If you never wanted to run Elasticsearch ever again in your life, come see the show on Wednesday. And I think Janice Q7 has given us a really great way to end too. The JWT token for the stream is expiring.
Nice.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. AuthO.
Thank you for having me.
One of my favorites. Seriously, I've used it for so many years now. I love it. It's such an amazing service. But you'll have to come back again and show us some more of the tips and tricks.
Would love to.
But for now, all right, on 3, y'all come back now. You hear? Okay.
Yep. Ready.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Y'all come back now.
Y'all come back now. You hear?
We'll see you next time. And thank you for joining us for Howdy Partner.